So I'm just going to move on to the movie, and we'll just kind of discuss this thing here. The movie itself, like I said, it's the end of the Pangborn trilogy specifically, but also Castle Rock in general, and the epilogue being it grows on you after. The movie version starts off showing the sweeping shots of the town on the waterside. You see this black ominous car pulling into the sleepy little town.
Beautiful classic Mercedes.
Yeah, you get this, and it's very, it's very fitting for the character. You get introduced to Nettie and Alan and Polly before revealing that the new business is opened up across from the Dot, which is where Nettie and Polly work. Which, interesting bit of trivia, the Dot was actually featured on some kind of television series filmed in British Columbia, because that's where this was filmed at. Or filmed in Canada or whatever, and they just reused the Dot like setting for this movie. I think because the director had some kind of involvement in both of them, but it's just kind of interesting that it existed in both. You see Brian Rusk be the first to enter the store. He meets Leland Gaunt, who says he's from Ohio, Akron. It doesn't sound like he's from Akron, Ohio, but that's a whole other issue. You get introduced to Wilma Jerzyk, because Leland Gauntz instantly wants to know what's up with the crazy lady that's out there talking about turkeys. And this is an improvement from the book, because in the book, Wilma Jerzyk was a grocery store clerk. And there is no way this woman's personality would work as a grocery store clerk at all. She's not got the personality for customer service. In the book, she is described as a person who lives for chaos. She lives for fighting with other people. If you even halfway mention something bad to her, she gets delight in causing you misery over it. And that's how she lives her life. She is the worst piece of shit person that you can think of. And there's no way that a person like that would, if that's all they could hire at that store, as what I'm going to say is that and that town's fucked, because I would not go to a store that woman worked at, honest.
Driving to the next town to get your groceries.
Exactly. Now, her as a, hateful, psychotic turkey farmer, that works. If she's out on her own, her thriving in chaos can function at that point, because she's, runs her own business. But I do not see her working for somebody else with her attitude. Just don't. Leland makes his first sale to Brian, of course. It's for a Mickey Mantle card. In the book, it's for a Sandy Koufax card, but they switch out a lot of the different, items in the movie, so that's fine.
I feel like Mickey Mantle is just one of those classics. Like, you hear the name and it's definitely a more popular card.
It is, and it works for that reason. But on the other hand, and this is something that I have a critique of the movie versus the book. In the book, you not only find out that Leland Gaunt sells you junk, like it looks to the person who's buying it like it's the best thing since sliced bread, but anybody else who sees it, it's a broken piece of junk, and it's nowhere near what he sold it to be. Like, if he sold you a mint condition Mickey Mantle, when somebody else sees that card, it's bent, it's ripped up in places, it's got scuff marks on it. It's the opposite of what you see it as.
Yes, I do remember that.
It's kind of one man's junk is another man's treasure type, situation. It's like it's all in the eye of the beholder. So the thing that I think is good about the book having it as Sandy Koufax is that it's Brian not getting, and they make a point of this in the book, you don't get what you absolutely want off of Leland Gaunt. You get something that in your mind is reasonable from Leland Gaunt. Like, you would never go up to him and get like 10 gold bars for like $1 or whatever, because your mind would not believe that you could buy that for that. But you could believe that you could buy like a knockoff, whatever else, and you paid like a smaller amount for it. You got a deal on that. It's, what I'm saying? It's like, I think King understood the retail mentality a little bit better than what they portrayed in the movie, because there's no way that a kid's going to believe that he can buy a Mickey Mantle card for like, 90 some cents and a prank. Whereas a Sandy Koufax card, you maybe could get that. I don't know. He's not that big of a name that even stood out to me. So I'm just like, okay. And it's one of those weird things where people don't always like the name stuff anyways. It's like, people, especially collectors, they like the B stuff a lot of times, like the stuff that nobody else like focuses on, horror movie collectors are especially like this. It's like, okay, you've got, Stephen King's Needful Things. Wow, who gives a shit? I got Knight Rider's son. I got the one, George Romero movie that nobody fucking knows about. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
exactly.
So I feel like Mickey Mantle, in a sense, plays better to an audience that would say, okay, this is a very valuable card in this kid. So obviously, but if you get down to the psychology of it, Stephen King had it better in the book because he went with a second tier thing that somebody would be more likely to believe they could get from Gaunt,
Okay.
And so, of course, he only asked for Brian for the money in his pocket. Not all of it. He wanted him to dicker with him. That's his specific words. He likes the art of the negotiation, basically, art of the deal. To quote another person out there, that a lot of people would say is probably the devil too. And a little prank, just a little prank. That's all you have to do, and it's yours. And so, of course, this is the point where, Gaunt starts wiring together the different fuse boxes that he knows specifically are within the small town. It's like, I'm going to wire Wilma Jerzyk to Nettie Cobb by use of these two other people so that nobody knows who actually did it. But the two involved think that the other two, that they did it. So they start fighting and on and on and on, And that's kind of the gist of the movie. And it goes on from there. I mean, we'll get into some more of the specifics, but that's the gist of the movie. He starts wiring together all these little small town feuds that never really bubble to the surface and get cleared up, and he sparks them and then just watches, the whole thing blow up literally at the end. So
likes to watch the world burn.
Yeah, basically. Now, I'm going to go through my positives of this movie first, and you can rank yours, because I've got a lot of negatives, and I'm going to save them for last because that's the tone of this. I'm going to set it up before we ever get to our rating. I'm negative on this movie. I mean, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but there's a lot of bad to it. So the positives for me is that some of the consolidations in the movie, while I believe that a longer movie and possibly a miniseries or a television series, especially with today's streaming that we're used to, would have been way better for this, and I think, and we'll get to that, everybody involved in this agreed that it would have been better as multiple connected stories. The consolidations they did, as far as, like, I'll give an example. In the book, Polly owned a sewing shop that she worked with Nettie. The diner was not where they went there sometimes, but the diner was owned by a Catholic woman named Nan, who owned who's like a big time owner in the town. So it was like they combined those two places together. They made Polly like the owner of the Dot, and that's kind of, and then, it went from there. They did a lot of things like that in the movie, like combined, 2 or 3 different things together. That way that it, cut down on runtime. That was good, and it was necessary for the single movie they were making. I still think that it would have been better if it had multiple, but they did good with that. Let's see. The making Wilma Jerzyk a turkey farmer, I've already said, way better than what the book had.
Yeah, way better.
She just doesn't make sense as a grocery store clerk. Max von Sydow, he stole this movie. He literally stole it. There's no, I mean, J.T. Walsh does does his own weird thing in this movie, and it stands out too. And Ed Harris does his best to, as in the role of Alan. But I'll get to that in the negatives. There's something about that too. But yeah. Max von Sydow just chews up the scenery. It's his movie, I mean, do you have any comments on that, like specifically about the acting, like anybody that stood out to you specifically?
Unfortunately, I do not, because I mean, everyone played their part, but it's that even Leland Gaunt in general, I mean, I know this person owns the movie, blah, blah, blah. I mean, but all right, let's move on because I need to save this for critique.
Okay, that's fine. I'm going to throw this in there. This is a little thing, but I did like the scene where Gaunt mentions knowing the carpenter Jesus. I thought that was a pretty interesting line they threw in there.
Yeah, that was cool, actually.
It was added by the last director, and I'll get into that whole series of drama later in the trivia part of this, but Fraser Heston was the one that added this line, and it was more of a reference to the fact, sly little reference to the fact that Sydow had played, Jesus in one of his older movies. But it was a good line, and I liked how it was delivered. And I did think that Amanda Plummer did a pretty decent job as Nettie. She wasn't exactly as she was in the book. She was more neurotic in the book, a little bit more very OCD. Like there was a point in the book where, and this kind of got on my nerves, actually, and for Stephen King's credit, she goes back and forth for I want to say 5 pages trying to figure out if she locked up her house. that sort of thing, because like she was afraid to leave it, and that's because she
Oh.
was going to leave her dog in the house, and Wilma Jerzik had already threatened to do something to her, and she's afraid of leaving her dog, and she's also afraid of leaving her needful thing, and I'll get into that too. That's something in the book that's not in the movie, and I think it should have been. But I mean, she's very neurotic, and I think Amanda Plummer played the part on screen well enough. They had to leave some of that out because of runtime, but you get the gist of that she's kind of just, kind of kooky. So she did a pretty good job with her character.
One interesting thing about Amanda Plummer that I want to throw out, and I don't know if you may have visually seen this, but I sure did, is that she reminded me of the sixth sister in Pet Sematary.
I thought the same exact thing the entire time. I looked up on IMDb whenever I first started researching this, thinking, I was like, she has to be that Zelda, I think is the name of the sister.
Yeah, Zelda's the name.
Was not her, and I'm just like, that is crazy. She looks exactly like the person they got to play that part.
It wasn't even a woman. It was a man that played Zelda.
I know. It's crazy. If you have any more positives to add, go ahead, because I just got a string of negatives at this point. So
it's hard because, okay, one thing is I did read the book as a child, and I swear I only have like one detail, and I'm going to need to confirm this with you because I did not Google it. I want to try to see if I remembered this correctly, so we will discuss it at the end. Because it is towards the end of the movie that the situation happens. And I'm like, okay, I know this was towards the end of the book. And I honestly don't remember much more from the book. I do remember, I don't know if you're reading it. And if it's scarier, well, the books are always scarier. So I guess that doesn't really count.
Your imagination's a lot better in any budget than a movie's ever going to have, period. I mean, it just is.
I'm going to have to save it because I just don't have any specific positives at this point. Because I both liked and disliked this movie, not for specific reasons, other than I'm rewatching it as an adult, and it's hard to remember that I loved it as a child, but now I'm an adult, and I feel a little bit differently about it now. And I can't think of a specific reason. I do know I pointed out a few things in the movie. Are we going to go through all the things in the movie?
I mean, you can go through them at times. I kind of steered away from that a little bit in my critique of it, because my overall critiques, well, I mean, I get to it later. I do, because I'm comparing it to the book. But, I mean, it's my critiques of the movie proper are mainly about, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the music. Stuff like that, like overall things, like they're not really.
Oh, okay.
So.
These are just certain points of the movie that I saw, and I was kind of like, okay. At the beginning, when Brian sees the baseball card and he says Leland is giving him the price. Well, not giving him the price. They're negotiating it. And Leland says he just wants a deed. And this card was 95 cents. And I was thinking, dirty deeds done dirt cheap. And I'm like, why am I thinking things like this? Why am I like this?
Stephen King had that, Maximum Overdrive. It was I think the soundtrack was entirely AC/DC, so that's not far off. So
okay, good. So I'm glad I'm not the only crazy person that does this during films. I just have one more thing that I want to point out, and then I'll go through the rest as we continue through the movie. But Nettie has a hellhound. Did you catch that? Because she totally has a Rottweiler.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get to that too. That's a critique I have from the book, because the book's way more powerful in that scene, just because it's not a hellhound in the book at all.
Well, obviously, yeah. So okay, let's move forward.
Okay, the music. I'm gonna get this right out of the way. The music was awful in this. It was very uneven.
I didn't really catch that.
It was clumsily used. I'll give you it didn't fit the tone of the movie at times. I'll give you a perfect example. This is the one that made me think of this, because upon rewatching it, for my critical part of this, whole thing. When Brian Rusk goes to the Jerzik farm to do the mudslinging, shit slinging, he also gets turkey shit in there and throws it on the sheets. He, in the book, he's all worried about getting caught, and which you would be if you were a kid. And I mean, and even less in the book he should have been, because Wilma went off and worked at another location. This was her farm. She would have been there. So for him to have went to that farm, he would have been worried about getting caught to a certain extent by the person that was there. the music that plays, it's a big swelling, like, grand thing that starts playing when he gets there. It's like this whimsical type music, like the kind of like that you would see in a movie about a kid that's, like sudden that's on his bike and he's just enjoying the day, and it doesn't fit the scene at all. Like, I mean, it should have been like this tense, like, music kind of like that piano harpsichord, like real sharp sounds, like you're always looking over your shoulder wondering who's gonna like sneak up on you, who's gonna catch you in the act of throwing this mud. And like, it's totally not that. Like, it's just him having this grand old time and this real lighthearted whimsical music. And I'm just like, what the hell were they thinking when they did this? I mean, and it's not the only time in the movie. There's several other times where they do like this kind of goofy lighthearted music, particularly around Buster's scenes. And I'm like, if you want to sell him as a villain, don't play him as like this jovial, like goofball type character. I mean, that doesn't sell the horror of him being like a Renfield at all.
Yeah, that makes sense, because for him specifically, he was comical. That's all I can say, because he wasn't threatening or scary or menacing in any kind of way.
And honestly, in the book, he wasn't painted as the, malicious, like thing that you worried about. He was the thing in the background that was going to, kind of set off some more dominoes. But he was like the third wheel in the unholy, triumvirate or whatever, the unholy three between, in the book, it was Leland Gaunt, Ace Merrill, who did the bulk of the work for Leland Gaunt, and then Buster was like the wild card. He was the one that was like the bottom of the rung. He was the one that threw the wrench into everything. And there was several times, and they hint at it in the movie, but there's several times in the book where Buster, contemplates suicide, because he's crazy, and in the book they give a reason why. He has a legit family history of psychosis that he's probably inherited, and it didn't really start coming to fruition until he started going to the racetracks like young in his life, and as part of a job thing, he was just kind of drugged there, and he realized that he like had this gambling addiction that he never knew he had. Like, he had none of the other psychosis or addictions that his family, his parents or his dad in particular had, and his uncle. But gambling was his. And when he got into gambling, that just set him down the path. And so he's more of a sympathetic character in some ways, even though he's still kind of a piece of shit. But in the movie, they just play him as just like too broad. I mean, like, he's just too comical and like and the music doesn't help at all in that sense.
Yeah, definitely not, because he just came off laughable.
And then one other thing I was going to say is that horrible scene of Ave Maria playing over Gaunt as he's smiling and steepling his fingers in his leather armchair as he's enjoying the chaos that he's, caused to happen in the town. That is so heavy-handed. It's so amateurish. It really makes this movie seem to be more like the made-for-TV film that it feels like. It's just this big, Ave Maria playing, grandiose, and him sitting there just smiling and his eyes twinkling, and I'm just like, oh my God, it comes to a complaint I have in the movie versus the book in general. Anytime they would switch to Gaunt specifically in the book, it was more about his thought process, what he was trying to accomplish. It was a little bit of monologuing, and that can be bad in ways, and I could see how that'd be bad in a movie. But there was ways that you could give more depth to Gaunt himself as a character when you switched to him during these scenes, instead of just showing these just Hallmark movie-esque like scenes of him just like, chuckling and, having a good old time. It didn't add to the movie at all. Like, it was just cutting back to him and him smiling, and then it cut back to the chaos. Give me something more Gaunt in those scenes. Like, I mean, what he's thinking, there's a great many scenes in the book where he's like, doing one-on-one deals with people. And like, he starts out being like this very pleasant, very accommodating person to Brian, and then everybody else after that, he gets more and more sadistic, to the point that literally when people walk into his door toward the end of it, he's like putting them in a trance, which he does in the book, and that's a whole other thing I'll get into, and instantly just telling them to shut the hell up. He's going to tell them exactly what to do, and he's tired of their shit. And I mean, you see that progression in the book, you never see it in the movie. You never see anything like that,
Yeah, in the movie, he's very basic bitch, pumpkin spice latte type horror. I mean, there's no real depth that he's adding, which, listening to stories of the book, listening to people talk about the book, I realized just how much more to him there is in the book, and the movie watered it down a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just scenes like that with that grandiose music playing that just totally ruined any kind of development they could have had for the character. It really did.
I think I was just numb while watching this movie, honestly, because it didn't affect me as much. But now when you were talking about Buster, yeah, I did catch that. I did catch the Ave Maria. I didn't think too much about it in terms of irritating me, but you're right. They could have added just a little bit more than him just sitting there tapping his fingers together like the typical villain. He might as well have had some mustache twirling going on.
He's literally like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons
Yeah,
in that scene.
exactly.
He's got his fingers stapled together, and he could have said, excellent, like that could have been it.
Yeah, oh my God.
And this plays into this goes right back into the music. This is another facet of the movie, the cinematography. It was so amateurish in this movie. It didn't add anything to it. And I'll give an example I have of this. Is there was these weird times where it would have these angles and zooms that were more wacky than were anything else. Like you'd have scenes where you would start out on Buster or like Nettie, and they would be, and I guess to symbolize that the character's kind of off tilt herself, but the camera would be like sideways, and then it'd do this weird little twist to get up, or zoom in on their face or whatever. And it was really goofy, and it didn't add anything to the horror element of the movie, and it was more comedic than it was anything else. It almost reminded me of somebody attempting a Sam Raimi style, like weird camera thing, but not done nearly as well. You know what I'm saying? It was like you take like scenes from Evil Dead and like, completely, and instead of having the whole movie kind of be like those interesting camera angles, just kind of pepper them into what is mostly just a workman-like, let's keep it, everything mostly in frame, not really move the camera that much type movie otherwise, and throw these little goofy like things in there. It really is not tonally consistent in the cinematography either.
And it's hard because I try to base the movies that I'm watching. When I think about the filming and the staging, I try to think about when it was made, but the fact remains that there's no excuse because there are other films that were made in this timeline that had way better filming going on. So while I would like to use the excuse, oh, well, it was the 90s, there were other movies that were made in even the 70s and 80s that had way better filming than this.
If you want an example of the difference, Dark Half, by weird coincidence, even though it was filmed in 1991, came out in 1993, the same year as Needful Things. One came out at the beginning of the year, one came out at the end of the year. It's night and day in the cinematography. You take George Romero and what he did with Dark Half, and I mean, there's all these dark scenes. He plays on the tension with the way he films it. It's night and day versus this movie. I mean, this movie is... You couldn't have asked for a more like 90s made-for-TV special than what this movie was filmed like.
Exactly. You know what? I'm just going to say it now, and this is just a slight interruption because you had mentioned that this might be better if it had been turned into a mini-series or something like that. And I agree with you on that. I mean, we are talking about Stephen King, but do I need to remind you about the Langoliers?
The Langoliers is the worst. I will give you that. And a lot of people have fond memories of Stephen King's It, and myself included. But when you go back and watch that movie, it is very amateurish. Also, the only thing that really stands out in that movie is really, the portrayal of the actual character. It's really not the rest of the movie at all. It's the actor who's playing the part. So. I agree with you. The 90s miniseries, but that's what I'm saying. This movie was marketed as being like a big budget film. Had a lot of big name actors in it.
It did not give off that
but
vibe.
It fit really well with a lot of his other 90s, made for TV specials. It really did.
All right.
The special effects.
Yeah.
Got to get to this. Awful.
Yes, they
Awful
were.
in this movie.
They really were.
They were shoddy and poor even by 1993 standards. You had those little lightning bolt effects that were badly animated that, anytime that somebody touched their needful thing, well, and that's another problem I have with this movie. That's not consistent. Not everybody had that problem. I think like Hugh Priest, when he touches his jacket, he doesn't have that lightning bolt, or at least I don't think that, or somebody in the movie doesn't.
He did.
Because I remember.
I don't think the Baptist character that got the phallic piece, I don't think he got the lightning bolt effect.
The Baptist didn't, and I don't think the Catholic priest did either. And I don't know whenever he grabbed the chalice, which I don't really, think that it showed much.
Was that supposed to be the fucking Holy Grail?
I don't know, because in the book, the one person who gets like a religious icon gets like this piece of wood that's like a big splinter. And
from Noah's Ark.
And it's Noah's Ark, yeah. And so,
okay, so yeah. See, I do remember some details,
and that makes more sense because you can, and like going back to what I said about how Leland Gaunt sells you something that's believable. You can believe that a old petrified piece of wood might be from the Noah's Ark. I mean, in a sense, especially if you're really religious, but trying to believe that you've got the actual chalice there in front of you and like a little store in your hometown that's that was the Holy Grail. Bullshit. There's nobody.
Yeah, he was really obsessed with that, and I was like, what is that supposed to be?
Well, that's a whole other critique of the movie, is that they don't, half of the things they show in that, they don't reveal what they actually even are. But I mean, when it comes to these special effects, they do the lightning bolt effect, then they cut to some poorly, visualized scene of whatever the person's seeing at the time they pick it up. And that's a huge complaint I have, because the very first thing that we see is when Brian Rusk, he sees like this bad stock footage of Mickey Mantle. And I'm just like, and it looks awful. And I'm like, you couldn't have taken like just a little bit of time to film somebody in place of, like Mickey Mantle, like, with a little bit better updated, movie standard, like at least in 1993 that matched the cinematography of the rest of the movie, the video quality, as opposed to having him like live out this like, 1950s, 40s, whatever time period, like, broadcast in his mind. You know what I'm saying? That like in the book.
No, absolutely. And I have something to say about that.
In the book, when Brian Rusk picks up the Sandy Koufax card, he is in the world with Sandy Koufax. He is right there beside Koufax as he's getting ready to step up to do his pitches or whatever. He is, he's hearing the crowd behind him. He's smelling the grass. He's hearing the crack of the ball against the bat. Like, I mean, in the movie, it's just like, no, I'm reliving like this old broadcast. It's like, oh man, that's
like you're watching her on a shitty TV.
Exactly. And this is something that I'll bring up later. Is that that I bring up along the same lines, it's not consistent even in that sense, because whenever plot-wise it's not, because when Brian in the movie picks up and he sees Mickey Mantle, he's seen this old, like highlight reel of Mickey Mantle. It's like, okay. When Nettie picks up her needful thing, she sees like killing her husband. Like, why would, and this has always been an aggravation for me watching this movie, if you're trying to sell something to somebody, why would she relive the worst moment of her life, having to break down and kill her husband because he was so abusive to her? And that's the selling point to get her to buy this little tchotchke that she's picking up. Like, I mean, wouldn't you want her to have like this glowing, like, like she picks it up, there's like, this child that's speaking to her or whatever the tchotchke's supposed to represent, why would she really, and it's like, okay, I picked this thing up and I relived, the worst moment of my life. Check, please. You know what I'm saying? Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah, well, I saw it differently. Are you talking about what happened in the movie, or are you talking about what happened in the book? Because I don't know if this happened in the book.
It happened in the movie, because in the book,
okay,
she relived that scene, but that's something else I get to later. In the book, it's revealed that when Leland Gaunt touches you, it is extremely unpleasant. There's something about his touch that is so repulsive that you instantly, the very first time you shake hands with him, or he, grazes your arm or anything, you get this extreme revulsion, and you never want him to be around you or close to you ever again, because you don't want that feeling to ever cross you. It's like something that shouldn't exist is touched you like a tentacle eel or something, and you don't want it to ever touch you again. And in the movie, he does grab her hand.
Yes.
At the same time that he hands her the tchotchke, and it could be symbolizing that, but they don't make it apparent.
No.
And they don't ever, and it might have been something they cut out, and that's something we'll get to later, is about all the cuts they made of this movie. But it's like she doesn't get to live her best moment with a Chotsky. It's like she gets to relive her worst moment, and it's only in the book when she relives her worst moment is when Leland Gaunt's pissed off at her, and he specifically grabs her arm and makes her relive that moment. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't make sense within the plot of the movie.
Well, two things. The very first thing that happens when he meets Brian is he shakes his hand and nothing happens.
Exactly. That is right. I remembered. I was like, there's somebody he shakes hands with and it doesn't happen. So there you go.
He shakes hands with Pangborn as well.
And that's something else that I hate is that, it wouldn't matter if you hadn't read the book. It's fine if you watch it in the movie, but I hate it as somebody who read the book. In the book, he never gets to meet Pangborn, or Pangborn never gets to meet him because Gaunt goes out of his way to not have Pangborn ever come into his shop because Pangborn can see the junk as it is, like Pangborn.
Oh, because isn't there two? Isn't there like another character that knows what's up?
There's only one other character that sees the junk, and that's only whenever he attempts suicide toward the end of the book, and that's Norris Ridgwick. Norris Ridgwick can finally see through the junk at that point, but Pangborn can see through the junk because Pangborn was exposed to the supernatural in the Dark Half. Whenever he met George Stark, that he now can see, like that opened up like something in his like mind,
in his psyche,
in his psyche, he can accept the supernatural, and so he sees past the illusion as it was. Like it no longer, like his past experience or brush with the supernatural has gave him that ability. And Gaunt even mentions in the novel, and this just makes it so much, a meatier story and better written when you combine them like that. Gaunt even mentions, he's like, there's always 2 or 3 people that's in that every town that I go to that is a problem because they can see through my ruse. But he said Pangborn in particular is a problem because Pangborn can see more than anybody I've ever met in my life. And so, that, and in the movie, it's just like Pangborn walks in there, it's like, hey, how you doing? And he's all buddy with him, and it just kills me from a book perspective because Gaunt specifically knew Pangborn was his one true enemy in the town, and he would have never let him in that shop, period.
Well, the tension I get from the characters in the movie, here is one positive. I don't remember the book so much, so obviously that doesn't faze me. When Pangborn and Leland were together, yes, they were kind of buddy-buddy, but you can feel or sense the tension between the two, primarily from Pangborn. I definitely sensed some jealousy from Pangborn when his fiancée sent over a pie, which I thought was kind of weird and useless.
Yeah, and that's not in the book at all. Like, I mean,
Oh, I figured, because that was so unimportant. But there was definitely a look of surprise on Leland's face when Pangborn said, I have everything I need. And the look on Leland's face was kind of a, oh shit, but not in a way that he was scared. More of a, okay, this shop is for somebody that needs something, and you are clearly a man that is not in need of anything. As for the Nettie part, I got a completely different vibe, which was interesting because what I saw was not so much that she just killed her husband, which we understand she killed her husband. They throw it in your face. Like, we get it. You vape. What I saw is that she really loved this little figurine that looked like a precious moment. I don't know. Figure. She loved it so much that when her husband violently broke it, she just lost her spirit. So that figurine hitting the ground was like the last thing she saw get broken before, 1, she either broke his face, or 2, maybe he went out on her violently, which ultimately led to her having to protect herself and kill him. Now, for whatever reason, she really loved this figurine and had such an attachment to it. So when she saw it in the shop, you could just see it in her spirit. She was so happy again. Now, the other one was the jacket, which the jacket and the figurine were actual things that you could touch and I could see potentially replicated. So they kind of made a little bit more sense to me.
The only thing I'll say in counter to that is if they wanted to play that route, and that's a good way to look at it. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. That's probably what they were intending. But there's 2 things to that. If they wanted to go that route, they should have focused on her enjoying the Chotsky for a minute or 2 in her mind and her memory before he came up and smashed it. That way you let her got a better, because that was one of those scenes that was also poorly cut and poorly edited, where it was like constant swoops around and all that. if they would have just lingered on her for a moment and how much peace that thing brought her before her husband came in and smashed it, then you would got more of that image that you're talking
Oh,
about.
yeah, absolutely.
But it
But you just
almost
had to imagine in your head that she loved it so much because you really didn't get any indication.
But the other thing in the movie is it almost paints it the other way and makes it seem like she is a sadistic person herself, because if that's supposed to be the thing that she enjoys, then and they focused more on the side of where she almost killed her husband, or they didn't quite show her killing her husband in that scene, but it led up to that scene. It's almost symbolizing the fact that tchotchke gives her pleasure because it reminds her of killing her husband, and which was enjoyable for her to do. You know what I'm saying? It almost paints it the other way around.
I like the way you think. That could make sense, and I guess it all just depends on how you view it, and I like the way you're viewing it because it's a little darker.
It's giving the movie way too much credit, but I mean, that's...
It is giving the movie too much credit, but it's also things that you have to use your imagination. I think there were certain things in this film that they could have actually shown. You know how we always say, like, don't show everything, leave a little to the imagination? I think they did that way too much in this film.
Yeah, they did, and I mean, I even like they were. I was reading in the trivia about how they basically focused all their budget on trying to recreate a skin dog, which I guess I should have put this at the top of the episode. Rutro Raggy, we got a dead dog in this one.
Retro Scooby.
Really.
Which was one of the reasons it was rated R, by the way. Yes, I have to throw this out there. This movie was rated R for sexual content, which was passionate kissing on a bed at best, mind you.
Yeah, that's I'll get to that. That was a cringe scene, but we'll go on.
Yes. And the only scary scene, scary and emotional, we have the Rotro Raggy scene that we mentioned. We have a doggy death.
But the thing about that doggy death is they spent all their budget on making this skin dog prosthetic, and I don't even remember it being in the movie for like more than a split second, like at all.
Yes, maybe a whole second if you put the two scenes together, which, by the way, did you like the way it looked at all? I did.
I didn't. It don't stand out in my mind at all, like just because it was so quick.
Are you serious? I mean, for me, I thought they did good.
It had to be.
I was more scared than sad.
It had to be good because Amanda Plummer, who's a big animal lover, I mean, would refuse to look at the prosthetic before they went in there or the piece before they filmed, and that reaction she has in the movie is her real reaction. That's the first time she saw it, and it freaked her out so bad that she literally broke down on set.
I did too. I do not remember this as a child unless it was such a bad memory. I just forced it out of my head. The kids definitely enjoyed it, but to be fair, you are correct. It is maybe a split second. We had to rewind and pause and play in slow motion just to try to get the full effect, but I thought they did a good job. Money wasn't well spent because I feel like it could have been, you would have been sad for the dog because it's a dog death, but they focused on it being so scary, and when it comes to budget, there's other things they could have done. Honestly, if they had just shown like a basic dead dog, they could have just had a fake furry dog laying on the floor with a little bit of blood around it, and you would have basically had gotten the idea that, oh shit, this dog was killed by this man. You would have been sad. I think that would have been just fine, but they went full-blown scary, horrific. I mean, this dog was skinned and tied up with its paws behind its neck. I mean, what the fuck?
Yeah,
they did good with the dog scene. It was the only thing that stuck out to me. You asked if I had any positives, and that was the only one. I didn't want to spoil it.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, that was the one thing that they focused on, so at least they got that, even if the rest of the special effects look like shit in comparison.
That's where they hit the mark, you know?
That's as far as my critique of just the movie itself, taking it upon its own like merits. That's where I mean, my beginning and end. It had just everything came together, make it just look like a slapdash made for TV movie. Despite the fact they had these veteran actors, these people who in every other way did a good job with what they had available. It's just the plot of the movie and how much was cut out of it just didn't work. I mean, because that's my biggest complaint about the movie in general. If we're going, I mean, just one more thing about the movie, the plot. You go from a few scenes of a couple of people fighting each other to literally in like a few minutes, or it feels like just a few minutes later in the movie, the whole town's like at each other's throat and blowing up. And you're like, how did we get to this point? Because the movie does not give you the background information I mean, it's another one of those instances where you were talking about how you have to infer it. It's like in your mind, all these people in the background are doing their own little infighting, but there's nothing in the movie to hint at that at all.
The only one thing I remember of that, which is stupid because they didn't focus enough on how badly these things were needed and how possessive these people were over these. I only got one instance at the very end of the movie, and it was one guy that was like, "You stole my Treasure Island book."
Yeah.
That's the only instance. And you were like, oh, he's obsessed with his first edition Treasure Island book. It's hard because without the visual effect of what you said at the beginning of this review, where in the book it looked like shit, but to the person it meant the world to them, it was like, they really should have emphasized that, and they should have given them more of a reason to be. They should have just had more supernatural effects in this movie. And I know sometimes horror films try to give off that human horror effect, which they kind of did, even though there was a supernatural entity that made people do horrific things. I get the human horror aspect. I just think they could have done a little more with the supernatural effects. I rarely say that because I know you can overdo it. Let's divert real quick to Leland Gaunt to show why I think they could have gone a little more supernatural. Great actor. I really thought that his mischievous tone was amazing. I never really, even though in the book we know who Leland Gaunt is, in the movie they never really quite tell who he is, unless I missed something. Now, my daughter...
There's one line in the movie where there's one line in the movie where he's talking to, I believe it was Hugh Priest, when he's handing him the gun so he can go after Harry Beaufort or whatever he says. And he's basically, that's whenever he's saying, he's like, I've lived for a long time as a peddler and basically like the Middle East or whatever. That's the only time in the movie you get any hint as to anything about Leland Gaunt in the movie.
Yeah, but it doesn't specify in the movie. Is he a demon? Is he helping the devil? What is he?
That's why I put the question mark after devil, because everybody paints him as the devil that watches the movie.
Yeah.
And that's what the directors even kind of, hinted at him as. But in the book, he's not that. I mean, Stephen King paints him as a demonic character, but he's more of the Lovecraftian mythos. He's more of like when we talked about the last season of, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, he's one of those, humanoid...
Trinket salesman.
Yeah, well, he's one of those humanoid Lovecraftian figures that travels from town to town sowing chaos. I mean, that's what he does. And it even hints in the book, I mean, he hails from the plains of Ling, which is like this Lovecraftian, other world. I think it exists in the dream world in Lovecraft's mythology. And that's where he collects the cocaine that he gives to Ace Merrill to keep him, constantly on his leash, is from the plains of Ling. And you don't know what Ace Merrill is snorting if it's coming from this other world dimension, but you can be assured that it's, even worse than what cocaine would be as far as like what it's doing to his body and his brain and everything else. But it's almost like dream dust or something. And then,
oh wow.
And then there's one scene where Merrill goes to pick up the car for Leland Gaunt, because that's one of the bones that I've picked. The rest of my critiques are just, the book versus the movie. In the book, Leland Gaunt just appears. Like, his shop's there one day, he's in it the next, no explanation where he came from, nothing else. That adds to the supernatural, kind of, background to him. It's like, where'd this guy come from? How did he get into town? And at one point he has Ace Merrill go and get his car at this location that's like in a rundown part of like one of the neighboring cities. And it's like when he goes there, it's so creepy. There's like nobody there, and the people that are like the one or two the homeless people that are there, they've got this weird look about them, like they're emaciated, not just on drugs, but like their spirit's been stripped out of them. He goes to this, when he goes inside the garage, like there's a tape player inside of it that plays on its own, and it's not plugged up, and it's gaunt. That's, clearly he's not been in this place in years because there's dust all over everything. But Gaunt just like recently recorded this and tells him exactly what to do and what to pick up. And, it's kind of explained away. Meryl's like, really freaked out by it, but he has a bump of cocaine and he's able to deal with it. But I mean,
oh shit!
And you got to remember that's a little bit of trivia about this movie. This was the first book Stephen King wrote when he became sober. So he had literally for years been on cocaine and every other drug imaginable. So he knew.
Oh yeah.
So when he was writing Ace Merrill in this movie, it's a stand-in for himself.
He had some depth to add.
Yeah. And so there's a mention in the garage, like there's something written like near it that says, all hail Yog Sothoth or something like that. And that is a Lovecraftian god or elder being. So there's Leland Gaunt is more of a Lovecraftian creature than he is technically a demon in the novel. In the book, they don't.
That's still a supernatural thing, though. I mean, no matter how you paint him, the movie should have given us more of that. I mean, look at. My daughter said, and she all but ruined any optimism I may have had for this movie. But she said, if this were a demon or the devil standing in my room, she said, you would laugh at him. And if you can't take the devil seriously, then he can't control you.
Well,
and I was like, okay, that's true.
It's fair, and they add a lot. And Stephen King, I feel in the movie they tried to make him too humanized, and in the book Stephen King does a very good job, despite the fact that he's hypercritical of this book, and I think it's mostly because it was his first sober book, and he's hypercritical of the job he did. But he did a really good job, in my opinion, of like straddling the line, because Leland Gaunt appears human, he mostly acts human, but there's the things with his fingers, like being like almost all the same length, which is already creepy. They're really long. His touch is, repulsive, which goes into another scene, going back to what you said earlier, that love scene or whatever. If his touch is that repulsive to, Nettie, then why can he have a love scene where he's rubbing all over Polly Chalmers?
You know why?
Don't make any sense.
I have the answer. I have the answer. What was in that necklace besides stupid-looking electricity? Tannis root. It was tannis root.
Oh, that is a good point. They could have went that route in the movie. I didn't even think about it. And then the devil could seduce her. In the book, it's totally different. It's like some kind of like Lovecraftian, like spider, like creature that is actually.
Thank you. You confirmed the one thing I remember from the book, or that I think I remember. Wasn't there a huge spider that crawls out of the necklace?
Yeah, and it feeds on her. Yeah, it feeds on her, and it goes from the size of a quarter to the size of like a small chihuahua or something in the course of like a few minutes. And she has to fight this thing in the dark, with her hands still arthritic. Now, they're not like in the movie. In the movie, she goes like full bore, like her hands are totally crippled as soon as she rips this off. When she rips it off in the book, it's another one of those signs that his stuff is junk, because her fingers are bad, but they're just a tad bit more than what they were with the trinket on. And she's like, why the fuck did I have this on the entire time? And that plays into the whole junk thing. He sells you junk and makes you think that you've bought like the greatest treasure that was ever existed in the history of mankind.
Yeah, they really don't show that very well. Can we rewind real quick to the first time that she met Leland Gaunt, and he was like, oh, the pain in your hand is so bad, and she was like, how did you know? And he was like, I spoke to Nettie. And she can't shake his hand. She's like, I don't shake hands, which would have played really well if you knew that once you touched him. You saw horrible things.
Yeah.
That's a whole thing. But then she goes and she picks up a full carafe of coffee with that hand and pours him a cup.
I didn't even think about that. That is good. That is another side in this movie, just doesn't know it. And you know what? They could have had a scene in between that would have, explained her hand getting slightly better, but then they cut it out, because that's the thing. This movie was originally filmed as a 4-hour movie, and they cut out 2 hours of it. At least an hour and a half, counting commercials. So they could have had a little in-between scene like that, and who knows, but that's another sign. It's like, one thing to the next, it doesn't make any sense as far as the plot goes. Why she,
How, as an actor or an actress, do you do that and say, okay, my line is this, but then I'm going to go pick up this heavy ass carafe. I can't even shake a hand. Even if you just placed your hand in someone else's hand while they moved it up and down. But you can grab a full ass carafe. Look, I'm a girl. I'm weak, okay? That's all I'm saying. But it seems like it would hurt a lot more to grab a carafe. Look, I had trigger finger and I wouldn't have been able to do that. And she has full-blown crippling arthritis.
It's just another one of those things where they cut so much and they're just trying to get a movie out that they I don't think continuity was even on their, the board of things they were worried about, honestly. I really don't.
Yeah, it is hard. Look, I really hate being the type of person that says, oh, the book is so much better. That's such a hipster fucking thing to do. And you're right, Stephen King was very, very proud of this book, and he should be. He did a great job, especially coming off of serious drugs. I feel like a lot of great artists, whether you're a musician or you're a painter or you're writing stories, there's so many examples of what a great artist is. But their visions while they're on various narcotics is just insane. It's amazing what they come up with.
That's the thing. He's hypercritical of this, though, in particular, meaning that he dogs on it because he says that it's not, super. I mean, like the supernatural is not as interesting as some of his other stuff. And I would argue the opposite. I mean, I feel like he did a good mix in this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm just going to get into some of the difference in the book. Leland Gaunt himself. Okay, let's rail this out there. His eye color changes every time that he looks at somebody. That goes into the whole thing about, the eyes are the windows to the soul type, scenario. So if somebody can change their eyes to everybody they meet, then that means that they're, what's behind them, obviously it's not human, but also there's something, really dark and twisted because you can never get like, that person, you can never get an angle on them as in general because their eyes never speak what's within them. And he used it to his benefit because if he knows, like, say your grandpa had like these ice blue eyes and you always remember that about your grandpa and you loved your grandpa, then he would have ice blue eyes when you looked at him. That way you felt like, oh, this guy's like my grandpa, like that sort of thing. He welcomed you in with his eyes that he could change at any, moment. He was from, like I said, the dream world, the Lovecraftian dream world type thing. He talked to people in his dreams. He never, in the movie, it shows him like leaving the shop and doing all this stuff in town. He never left the shop except toward the end of the book, in the book, because he always communicated to people telepathically and through their dreams. If he wanted you to do something, you would have a horrible nightmare, and he would promise you that the nightmares would get worse if you didn't do what he said.
Which, there's one scene where Brian's like, I saw him in my dreams, and this kid, he's a child, has a gun to his head, and you have no understanding why. All you have is this horrible explanation, which actually mimics how well a kid explains anything. The actor actually did a great job. But we couldn't see this dream? A 10-second snip of what this kid allegedly saw that was so horrible?
Yeah, they probably wouldn't do it exactly how it is in the book. There's a lot of sexual stuff in this, which makes sense. I mean, some people's, needful thing is going to be sexually oriented. Like, I'll give you an example. Brian Rusk's mom and her best friend are both obsessed with Elvis. One of them gets a photo of Elvis.
Oh, shit.
And one of them gets, and his mom gets the sunglasses. Both of them in their dreams are basically having sex with Elvis, and they're literally in their room with these items, like, masturbating. So that's their needful thing. That's how they live within their needful thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would have tied in really well with the rated R.
It would have.
They totally could have used that if they had to.
And Brian Rusk is in love with his, because he's like a 12 or 13-year-old boy, is in love with his speech teacher in the book. He don't really, and so there's a scene where he, in his dream, he is being, pleasured, by hand by his teacher, and which would be really creepy in movie, but it's in a kid's dream, it is what it is.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then the teacher turns into Leland Gaunt, which is even creepier if you can imagine Max von Sydow suddenly with his hand on a kid's
Ew.
member. So I know why they cut some of those scenes out, but
yeah, I can understand that.
But I mean, they could have come up with another type of dream where Max von Sydow just hulked out and became like the demonic vision, which is a whole other thing that's in the book that I was going to say about him. when he gets really mad, his demonic side comes out, like smoke comes out of his nose and, and his mouth. His eyes turn fiery red, like he has, like, his voice drops like an octave, like you would imagine a demon, and like his face starts like cracking and peeling, like, like it's on fire. So it would have been cool to see that at some point in this movie at all. And the other thing he does too is that and this makes way more sense than the movie ever did to me. Whenever he sells something to you, he knows that he can't ask too much, and he knows exactly what you're willing to part with. So he always says he's negotiating, but it's not really a negotiation, because he gives you just enough of a discount to make you feel like that you got a deal on it, kind of like JCPenney's does in real life. It's like, you saved 40% on this thing. It's like, oh, great, this is my favorite thing ever because I saved so much money. But then he's also on the other side of it. Whenever he asks you to do the thing where he wants you to do a trick, it's always whenever he's done negotiating and it's time for people to pay up and they're agreeing to this stuff, it's all done under a trance. They don't remember any of it other than the fact that they agreed to do something for Mr. Gaunt, and it's a little simple thing, and it'll be kind of fun whenever they do it. That's all they remember. They don't remember anything else. And it's like, I would have preferred to seen that in the movie where he's kind of like hypnotizing them. It's like, because you can see a kid possibly agreeing to throw in, turkey shit at Wilma Jerzik's sheets because she's a horrible person. But then you take somebody that, like the Catholic priest, and you get him and he's going to stab somebody's tires for no reason. I'm sorry, but I don't believe that priest would just be like, oh, hell yeah, I don't like Hugh Priest anyways. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's not like, it's a little much. It's a little stretch of the imagination even if these people are petty, which they are, to just assume that they would automatically agree to do this without some little bit of hypnosis to go along with it to kind of push them along the way, at least the adults, And side point about all that, Wilma Jerzik didn't get a needful thing. I don't know if you remember that in the movie, but she don't actually get one. She goes into the shop, she gets pissed off, and she leaves. So she's a byproduct. As shitty as she is, her death has nothing to do with her actually involving Leland Gaunt at all. It's just because, she's the type of person that can easily be blamed for something, and she's fine with that. She actually enjoys being blamed for things.
She's hot-headed.
Yeah. So, all the stuff with him being supernatural, I really miss in the movie. I'm with you. They should have at least, if they didn't want to make him full-on supernatural, at least give him a little bit more of a hint of that. He's basically just a guy with ugly fingers and nasty teeth, in the movie. The thing they really miss in the movie, one more thing I want to say before I get to the story, the novel versus the movie. Did you realize that the lead in this movie, Alan Pangborn, is not in the movie for almost an hour?
No, I did not, if we're being honest. If you enjoyed this episode of the review of Needful Things Part 1, please look out for Part 2 coming soon. Death Holler is brought to you by Los Diablos Blancos Network, with your host, the Reverend Dr. Death and Llareyna. Please like, subscribe, follow, share, and review. It really helps the show. We'll catch you next time. And don't forget to bring your death certificate.